Mr. Burleson?
Here.
Ms. Cardona?
Here.
Mr. Gill?
Here.
Mr. Gillette?
Here.
Ms. Little?
Here.
Ms. Woland?
Here.
Mr. Kennedy?
Here.
Mr. Everly is here. He's just not present in the room at this time. Mr. Kraus?
Here.
Mr. Decker? Attorney Decker?
Here.
Mr. Panzik?
Here.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. First item on the agenda for study session is Oak Ridge Estates Development, John Lawton. It's an R2 PUD single-family development for the 40 acres on the northwest corner of White Oak and 109. Tim, good evening.
Good evening, Plan Commission members.
All right. So,
Rick's still playing catch-up.
Oh, okay.
So, he is present in the room now. They noted your presence, but not present, so. But the subdivision for this 40 acres is still the same as the last month and a half, 78 lots on the 40.33 acres. Yeah, I don't know what else to add. I can answer any questions you may have, but still the same.
Open up any questions, comments from the board? I guess, Tim, I'll ask a question. There was discussions in previous meetings about potentially connection of a bike path either through or potentially around the subdivision. Have any decisions been made by the developer?
At this point, we'll be doing the sidewalk, which is the requirement of the subdivision control ordinance. We're still willing to entertain those things about connectivity with a bike path or something else. There's some, vacant area towards the Altoff project to the west there. And we'll be doing some things with that, but we could still work those things out later on without affecting the plat or the engineering.
So potentially, if you do a sidewalk, the width of that is, what's, 5 feet? And what's the bike trail?
Usually.
It can vary.
8? Well, the one that's currently at White Oak to the,
Somewhere between 8 and 10. I never
I think it's 8.
put a tape on it.
I think it's an 8.
I think it's 8.
so hypothetically, if you do continue it, you would do an 8-foot asphalt
Yeah, it'd be
path.
similar to the other things, just like we're doing on East Klein and things like that, yeah.
So if a decision, I don't know if the board has any comments, what they would like to see, or if it, want to leave it to the developer to decide.
Well, Mr. President, I had recommended that the developer show some sort of an option. The concern I have, and I'll bring this up here on the GIS so everybody can see it, is the connectivity to Silverleaf. Let's see, here's the property as we're zooming in to it. Computer's running as slow as I am, it looks like. All right, this property here, this is the 40 acres we're talking about. There is nothing to directly connect to here. Looks like the best option, to me anyway, is presented right about here alongside this existing house and coming out to this sidewalk that's in Silverleaf. There is no bike path to connect to directly in Silverleaf. So, and this is wetland area owned by the HOA, the Silverleaf Paired Cottage Association. So to make this connection, not sure who's gonna do that. I don't know if the developer's proposing to do that, if the developer's proposing to discuss this with his landowner. And I've gotta believe that that's gonna meet with resistance from this property owner particularly. But I guess that's where I see the best possibility of connecting to Silverleaf. If you just put the sidewalk along the frontages, then you're not connecting to anything. You put a sidewalk here and here, there is no sidewalk getting over here to Silverleaf, there's nothing going to the east as well, so, there's a cutout for a sidewalk in Silverleaf right here, crosses the road, but there's nothing that goes over to this property. So, don't
Yeah.
achieve connectivity if you put a
You have to
sidewalk
wind your
in.
way between the trees,
Try
but.
to run something through the development with the intention of tying into perhaps here, then you've still gotta deal with another property owner, and who's gonna put that section of bike path slash sidewalk in. You're not gonna go through any of these yards to get over here, you can't go through this property, so I only see the possible connectivity as being right here. And I'd be real surprised if that didn't meet with resistance from those property owners.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
John, may I? May I make a comment?
Yeah.
Okay. It might be best, or I would suggest that running the typical sidewalk along 109th could be an option, because once you reach Silverleaf, there's dedicated right-of-way. We would not have to worry about working with the HOA for property or acquiring any property, or so much of a remonstrance from the one property owner. I mean, obviously, the town would have to provide that connection, but if provided, it would connect that neighborhood into Silverleaf entirely. And to the north, it would dead end for now, but it's pretty close to Heartland Park, so it just might be easier to have them put down the standard sidewalks as required in our subdivision control ordinance.
Right, I agree.
Yeah, I would agree, because
Yeah.
putting the sidewalk through the
Wetland,
wetland area might be difficult too, and,
yeah.
Still gonna have to put the sidewalk through the wetland to put it down 109,
yeah.
even greater distance.
Along the frontage of 109th, Jonathan, is that what you mean, right here?
Do we have any bike paths on 109th, like on the street?
No.
No? Because
I
it
was
would be
thinking
nice, it would
if-
just be nice to run the bike path all the way south to 109th.
Yeah.
The
And then maybe
GIS
go
is
to
not
sidewalk.
showing wetland along the road, but that doesn't mean it's not there. Jonathan's right. I don't know if you guys have done a delineation yet. You have? All right. So that's,
Everything that looks like
okay.
What's the dedicated right-of-way that,
Well, you're dedicating more.
for 109th?
Yeah, right. It should equal this. This is a 50-foot dedication in Silverleaf, Bob,
Match that.
right here. So the, I'll pull that. It's right. It's off that drawing.
So you're providing 50,
Yeah, so that would be
50
dedicated.
additional feet? Okay.
Well, it'd be
Or
30,
from the center line.
yeah, it'd be 50 feet
From the center to
line.
the, where
Correct.
dedicated right-of-way would be
Right.
50 feet?
It'll
Okay.
match this right-of-way that's here, right?
What about on the east side of White Oak? I know Public Works mows that grassy area just off the right of way, and if you could get like a bike trail north to Patno Park, you could tie into the bike trail that goes across to Heartland Park, and that also continues to the preserves. But yeah, we mow all that already behind the people's property on Millard. And then at Patno Park, the bike trail crosses over to Heartland Park and goes south into the park, and then it goes north ultimately to the preserves.
It's almost like an asphalt on the west side of 100, or White Oak,
On the
does-
yeah, it's the same, yeah.
on their side of the street, instead of a sidewalk, having more of a bike path.
Well, if you wanted to connect into there, I think that's all town property behind the homes on Millard there.
All of this is, here, John, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. And then you could just cross it somewhere along there to get them. If you went from here south on the east side of White Oak, you could have a bike trail that connects with all the other bike trail in the whole west side of town.
So you're saying,
Because then you could bypass that house before you get to our pole barn.
so you're saying, John, have them provide a bike path on the east side of White Oak instead of a sidewalk on the west side of White Oak?
I mean, if you're looking for the bike path
Yeah.
connectivity, I think that's another option that would bypass that lone house that's not in town.
My only concern is if you have the 109th and White Oak intersection, if we don't, we have potentially sidewalk on the south side.
Mhm.
But then there's no connectivity coming north, we lose all connectivity to that intersection.
Right.
Heading south. I don't know what's gonna happen there, but now we have no safe crossing or some sort of access point for people heading south to,
Or even if they set it up and still do the sidewalk, and then we could eventually do
or do,
the bike path
I don't know if
connection, if they really want the bike path connection.
Maybe
Versus
provide
going-
a cross here, and then if this gets developed, then have one on the crossing 109th.
And again, for our purposes, we're putting in the sidewalk. We were just asking if there was alternatives that maybe you wanted to explore, but again, we're happy to put that in per the subdivision ordinance. That's what the plans call for.
okay. I mean, is there any other suggestions, ideas that, I mean, I would like connectivity at least onto that intersection, but if it's asphalt going north on White Oak, if there's more bicyclists that would use that, because sidewalk, no one likes to ride a bike on a sidewalk. So,
And if you have any thoughts, you certainly can convey those through Mr. Eberly, and then we could take a look at those.
Sounds perfect. Comments, questions, before we go to the next bullet point?
I have one.
Yes.
I noticed, and I've talked with Turinga and with Mr. Lawton about the name of the subdivision. You know, Oak Ridge, there's a street that runs through Candlelight Trails and into Homestead Acres with that name. I just didn't want there to be confusion between that street and this subdivision.
Well, we have a similar situation with
Summerlin
Summerlin.
Estates and Summerlin's in Mill Creek too, so.
Yeah. So it's,
I think the James is the bigger problem than
yeah,
the
there's,
name of the subdivision.
that's supposed to be changed. The name of one of the streets is
Correct.
James. Yeah, that's to be changed.
Well, just to start understanding that their goal or their obligation is sidewalks along the southern border of their property and their, on White Oak. Besides that, is there any other ideas that you think are more appropriate? If not, again, we could convey that to Rick or suggestions, but, I just know bicyclists don't like to ride on sidewalk, but I don't know how much bicycling is going on in that area south of the park. So,
Before you move on,
Yep.
Tim, so you said that the developer obviously is considering putting the sidewalks as they should. But have you guys considered anything in terms of the bike path that John is talking about, or no?
No, because there's really nowhere for it to go. That's why we kind of threw it out there to see if there was some ideas or something
Sure.
we didn't know about for further connectivity down 109th. South, Palmyra at some point will be developed, which is close. Again, there's little intermittent properties in between, but to see, if there was something else that maybe wanted to be done, because you can install it one way or the other, basically, and it's fine.
yeah, I was just making sure we have some sort of connectivity just for
Yeah.
some future. Okay. All right, point B, Gates of St. John. Tim is here again. He's got the R2 PUD, single-family development. Again, both of these, A, I didn't say that, but B will go to a public hearing on March 4th. This is for preliminary plat of Unit 24 and 25, which is in the southern end of the development of the Gates of St. John, the east Gates of St. John, sorry.
Correct, and again, what you have before you should be reflective of what you've seen over the last month. The only changes, if I could, if you go to the last one, Rick,
Last page.
yeah, the last page. That's the only one. There was a new one that was submitted earlier that Mr. Kraus has reviewed. I don't know if you have that in your file or not.
Is that,
Change to add that. Good.
Okay, I've discussed that one with John, but I don't believe I have that drawing, Tim.
It was, I apologize, I only have one of it.
Yeah,
But there, we cut the street south to have the stub in there. You can
Right.
Pass it around, or,
Okay.
and I apologize, I thought you would have that.
and send it to him real quick, if you want.
But at the last two meetings, it was requested that we look at it extending a south stub into the Barman property. We did do that. We submitted it to Ken, so that that connectivity would be to the property to the south there. So if,
right, so there's a lot that, the road comes down here now, right, Tim?
yeah, it basically squares that off and then goes south there.
Yeah,
Other than that, the plan is still the same and everything else, except for that road stub to the south.
Rick, in the subdivision control plan, if I remember correctly, it said any subdivided land, you have to provide
a stub to it.
a stub?
A stub, access to it, yes. And I had the conversation with John Lawton about this. Talked about the possibility of a stub into this side of the property as well, but what I'd forgotten about was this east side is age restricted, age targeted, I think is the right term. It's not age restricted, it's age targeted. And for one thing, for another, it's got, what we didn't want to do is create a raceway through this property from 109th up to 101st. So, granting access to this property or allowing access to the property to the south is one thing, but to provide it here makes for a,
Less convenient way to just
yes,
race through.
much less convenient way to get through the subdivision to try to bypass the intersection of Klein and 109th and get up to 101st. So it provides the connectivity, the accessibility without providing a straight shot through the subdivision.
And is it the same property owner along the whole southern boundary?
It is,
It is,
yes.
all the way to 231 from Klein and then over to Green Acres, that subdivision to the
Right.
east.
And Green Acres provides a stub into that same Barman property.
Correct, there's
from
an
its
easement there,
development. Right. Right.
I guess my initial, it's great we have a stub. Is it enough? And I understand the whole raceway. I get that. That makes logical sense. I'm just concerned we only have one stub heading south from this whole development of X amount of units. And it'd just be nice to see more connectivity to the south, but I understand your concern about making a raceway.
If you believe Mr. Barman, this will never, ever, ever, ever be sold or developed.
I totally,
which
I agree,
there's
I understand what,
fifth,
and I'm not,
generations.
I'm not saying this is, we're
So-
forcing anything on them, but our goal is to look past into the
Absolutely.
future, 30, 40, 50, 100 years down the road. My
Absolutely.
concern is we just have one access point to the south with all
So
this
if you
development.
look at this overall plan here, you can see that, okay, thank you. If you provided an access point here, that's a pretty straight shot up to this cul-de-sac. This one would be a straight shot all the way through the development to 101st, and that we wanted to avoid. This one, obviously, if you come in here, you've got to snake around to find your way, you know, up here to 101st, and you're just not gonna do that.
And then Mr. Kennedy, in Green Acres, which is the subdivision over here, there's access.
Right,
in that.
yeah, right here, right about here.
Can you say that again, Tim, for me? I apologize.
So Green Acres is a subdivision in Lake County, unincorporated, that's right here. There's a easement through here to the roadway that connects into Barman's property also.
That's correct.
Just for information, because I know you're concerned about not having enough.
I'll show you that on the GIS, so you can. Oh, this is this slow.
Got one? No, it's all right.
See it right there in the yellow?
Yeah, right here. Yeah, it's right here.
But it is there, and then it connects over to Barman's property.
Right. So it's got a connection into the Barman farm here. Green Acres also has a stub into the property to the north of it, going up
And-
here
and
as well.
Rick, that property's the tree farm? That's actually Sherrville
Yeah,
Incorporated,
right.
correct?
right.
Okay.
Mhm.
So we're stubbed in from the west and Green Acres as well. Okay. Yeah,
Right.
that'll,
I think it's up front. Yeah. Yeah, that's way up there.
All right. Any other discussions for Tim regarding public hearing, again, on March 4th for the replat of units 24 and 25? So with that addition, Rick, with that easement for a future roadway, all subdivision standards have been met?
Correct.
Okay. And again, the subdivision standard says just access. It doesn't
Right.
give a certain amount of access points to unsubdivided developments. It just says one access, a access point.
Right.
Trying to remember what it says.
The A subdivision, and again, I'll bring this back up. Let's see this one here. A subdivision is supposed to have 2 access points, minimum of 2 access points. So the Gates East has 3, actually. 105th here, 101st here, 101st here. So that's what it's got to provide. Now, if the Barman Farm ever develops itself, then it is supposed to have at least 2 access points. One could be this one here that they're providing, and the other would be presumably off of at least one, either 109th or Klein, and maybe both. And it's got one through Green Acres as well. So
It has one to the east, correct?
Correct,
Yes,
that's in Green
but-
Acres.
Yeah, Green Acres, okay.
this development, when it butts up against unsubdivided property, is to provide access to that unsubdivided property. It's just to provide access, and it's doing that by putting a right-of-way, extending the right-of-way right here.
So unit 25, am I reading that number right?
Mm-hmm. 25's right there.
Oh,
25's
go up
here.
one more.
26.
26. So there's that land to its east, it's unsubdivided? Does there need to be a
It's-
connection point there, or no?
And that's in Sherrville.
Their connection to that property is here,
Okay.
John. Yeah,
Very good.
yeah.
Okay. Very good.
And just information, that property that you're referring to is in Sherrville.
Okay.
Right.
Cheryl. All right, any more questions from the board? Tim?
Nope.
All right. Tim, I'm gonna refer back to you for, again, this is on public hearing for March 4th. This is for preliminary plat of units 27 and 28 in Gates of St. John East.
If you just leave it out for a second.
Yeah.
So this is the northern part of the subdivision. This is 27 and 28, that's going to be 101st area. That's into 26, 22, and 21 that were previously platted last year. So that's just the completion of the northern part of it. Nothing's changed since the last meeting. There was no comments at the last meeting, so it's still the same.
Curb and gutter sidewalk on the north side?
Correct.
Okay.
And
Is there any entryway?
No, there's no curb.
Oh, I'm sorry,
I'm sorry, sidewalk.
sidewalk.
Correct, sidewalk. And then just for, again, for information, the bike trail that we talked about previously will come in here and then run up the backside of these lots and then into the Sherrville connection at some point when it comes down.
And when you say bike trail, 8 foot wide,
Correct,
asphalt?
Asphalt. Except for the area in front of, but that's a different subdivision that has sidewalk.
I don't know if anyone asked this question or if I did and forgot signage. Are we having any monument sign in any
It
of these
would-
entry points?
It would only be what's allowed by the sign ordinance right now. We're not planning anything, large or huge. If we did, we'd have to come back for that, so.
Understand. Okay.
Well, that, just as a reminder, where subdivision signage is concerned, there are no regulations in the sign ordinance for that, Tim. That signage is to be presented to this board at the time of primary plat, public hearing, so they can yay it or nay it. So
Okay.
you just present something, because there are no standards for subdivision signage.
I thought there was still a total square footage that we couldn't exceed anyway, even for a subdivision sign in there.
No, not for a
Okay.
permanent subdivision entry sign, no.
We'll take care of that then.
And you've been in on the side, just make sure line of sight is taken care of or
Oh,
addressed.
absolutely.
Thanks, Tim. Do you know how many potential signs you would have? Would you have one on 101st, one on,
So it would be similar to the gates right now. It would just be something nice, but not over the top or anything else, you know, like the current entrances or on the main boulevards. You have see-through, there are some columns, but, I mean, so you're not talking,
We put one at all three of the main.
yeah.
okay. Questions, comments to the board? All right. Number D, this is again for public hearing.
On March 4th.
Public hearing D, this is Gates of St. John, Unit 22. This is a re-subdivision of lots 2249 to 2258. And I'm sorry, for the board, one question. With the addition of the easement in units 24, 25, no change to the square, I mean, there's gotta be some change to the square footage, but it keeps it all within
Yeah, they
range.
were,
Okay, yeah, they were pretty,
they were,
Okay.
11,679 square foot average, so it's not gonna
okay.
impact that.
All right, Tim, I'll turn it back over to you.
Again, nothing's changed over the last month. There was no additional comments last time. Just consistent with the overall plan again.
And what John was referring to was, of course, they have to meet a minimum, they have to meet an average lot size of 11,200 square feet over the entirety of the development. That's the entire 220 acres. And they exceed that, they actually, with this replat here, they get to 11,679 square feet per lot on average.
Everyone understands what's happening here? They have these lots and they're gonna subdivide them, so any questions, concerns, comments for Tim from the board?
No.
Tim, I think you're done. Are you done?
I hope so. We don't
I'll
have to talk
see you
about
on,
letter of credits
Wednesday the-
tonight.
All right, sir.
Thank you. We'll see you in
Thank
a
you,
couple
Tim.
weeks.
All right, we'll see you on the 4th. Next on the agenda, this is John. I'll just use it as John. Combining two lots on Lake Hills into one subdivision at 10351 Lakeside Court. John, I apologize.
That's okay.
Pronounce your last name for me again.
Sahas,
Sahas.
Yeah.
John Sahas.
thank you.
He is seeking to combine two lots into one. Again, this will be at a public hearing on March 4th.
This goes with that.
John, I'll turn it over to you if you just want to give a brief description on what you're proposing.
This doesn't
So,
have a name.
I'm proposing to take two lots, that I acquired in Lake Hills and eliminating that center,
Lot line.
lot line there. And utilize both, properties to build one house on.
Right. There's no engineering to be done here. It's simply combining two lots into a one-lot subdivision in an existing development.
Do you know the positioning of the house? Will you have it at a winding trail address or a lakeside court address?
We're hoping for a lakeside court address.
I think they both currently carry a lakeside, yes, they do, court address, it looks like, yes, they do. So,
And this is just driveway on the east or west side?
and the setbacks, Mr. Kennedy, also presume a lakeside court address. You can see the minimum front yard setback is 25 feet, the maximum is 40 feet. This 20-foot building line over here is a side yard setback.
Oh, it's a cul-de-sac. Not getting much activity. Any questions for the board?
Nope.
Comments?
I have just one. A lot of times when we have a situation like this where they're taking two lots in existing subdivision, that we sometimes do preliminary and or
Yes.
primary and secondary on the same night.
Right.
There's also the subject of the review fees. There's usually a $900 minimum fee for primary plat reviews and another $900 for secondary plat reviews. I'm only going to be reviewing one plat here, so I don't know if you want to waive one of the $900 fee. And then when I get this, I'll just review it as a secondary plat.
Rick, I don't know if I've ever
I would
addressed
recommend
something.
that. We're,
Okay.
we're not gonna come anywhere near that $900 cost to review
Well,
something
there are
like
no
this.
public improvements left to be put in. And
Yeah.
I
the
don't,
fee is based on 2% of the construction of whatever improvements need to be put in.
I'm just asking the question because in my tenure, I've never had that experience, that request, so I just want to make sure it's something we've done. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Any questions or comment for John? So then, on March 4th, public hearing, then the board would consider a preliminary and a secondary
Yes.
approval for that.
The request will be for primary and secondary
Primary.
plat. You can't sign the secondary plat until 30 days after the primary plat is approved. So assuming you approve it on March 4th, it can't be signed until April 4th roughly. And I've explained that to John, so
Okay.
he understands that. But he would not have to come back to another meeting to get that secondary plat approved.
Gotcha. All right. John, we will see you on March 4th.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir. Next on the agenda, Moonraker Estate, Doug Reddick. He's got two
Very
lo-
similar situation from Mr. Reddick. It's 2 lots in Castle Rock subdivision being combined into 1 lot to be known as Moonraker Estates.
Moonraker Estate. I sent you the drawing,
Yes.
but I have paper if anybody wants paper.
I have it here, Doug. I'll pull
This
it
is
up.
in my backyard. I'll look at it, Doug. People are gonna be asking me. It's in my backyard.
Thanks, Doug.
Matters.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you. Is that Jim?
I'm good, yeah.
And she wants to do a house that she found in Rosewood.
Good evening, Doug Reddick with
Two
DVG.
lots to fit the size.
Very similar to the last presentation. I have a client that's purchased 2 lots in Castle Rock, lots 11 and 12. She wishes to combine them into 1 lot to build 1 house. Altogether, this is about a 2-acre parcel. Each lot was close to 1 acre. So we're just over 2 acres total. She just told me on the phone, I have not even met the lady yet, that she just wants a little bit more space. So that's why she's doing what she's doing here. All the improvements are in, it was, platted subdivision. Similarly, my plan was to come back in 2 weeks and request permission to advertise, like we always do, and have a public hearing in April.
Right,
And I would like to ask for primary and
Right.
secondary at the same time.
exactly.
Well, you don't, wait, he doesn't have to request for a,
Right.
you
What
don't-
we're doing now, Doug, is we're just changing that, instead of seeking permission to advertise, we're just making an announcement at the next meeting that you will be coming to the April 1st
So you
agenda.
don't need to attend the
So
meeting.
you don't even, know.
We'll just make a public notice that,
My
yeah,
first
you
time
are
here this
having-
year, so,
Yeah.
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 Okay. Nonetheless, we're going for primary public hearing in April.
And Ken, I would think the same conditions would apply to this in terms
Yes.
of fees?
Yeah, they're almost exactly the same.
Right.
so you've already, okay, this black that's shown, this is both lots already. So this is, lot 1 is both lots already included.
Correct, and you
Okay.
can see the light line down the middle, that's the
Yeah.
original lot line between lots 11 and 12.
Okay. And this is behind the cul-de-sac, right? Just
No,
northwest
this
of the
is-
cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the way down towards Calumet.
Yeah.
Right, northwest of the cul-de-sac.
Okay,
I think it's Calumet, like, at this lot 9 or 8.
okay. I know where it's at. Okay.
It goes straight through to yours.
Questions or comments from the board to Doug?
Slam dunk.
So we may or may not see you in March, but we'll announce that there will be a public hearing on this for April.
Very good, thank
All
you.
right.
And this
Thanks,
will,
Doug.
Doug, this will not be on the study session for
I wouldn't
March,
think
no.
so.
There's no reason to do that.
Very good, thank you.
Okay.
So they would have to put all the sidewalks in for both lots then, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
All right. Number G, Anthony Casboni is petitioning to rezone just over 2 acres of his property at 9451 White Oak from open space to R1 Single Family Residential to creating 4 1-acre lot. Mr. Casboni,
Yes, good evening. Number one, there is a mistake. It should be AC Group Holdings LLC.
Right.
I'm the member of the LLC, so that should be AC Group Holdings LLC, just for the record.
On the agenda.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be, on
Okay.
the regular agenda, I do show it that way, but, yeah. he's-
very good,
he's
Mr.
correct.
Casboni.
Okay.
Can you, Mr. Casboni, if you can make a presentation to the board for us on what you're planning on doing or proposing?
Yes, 9541 White Oak, I own the property there. There's actually, I want to rezone it from open space to R1. There's approximately 2.3 acres. I'd like to rezone from open space to R1.
So obviously, the lots more than meet the 25,000, or 20,000 square foot minimums for R1. Open space would require minimum lot sizes of 2 acres. So this is simply a request to seek rezoning of this property. Now, he shows it laid out in lots like this, but I believe Mr. Casboni does not intend to actually do the platting of this development. That'll be left up to whomever the buyer or buyers are. What he wants to do, he does have a legal description of each lot, and it's, you don't see the whole thing on here, but you can see it across the top here. There's lot 1, lot 2, lot 3, lot 4. And he intends to sell them the properties that way, but he could wind up with one buyer who buys them all, but somebody's going to have to come in and plat the property. I had a chance to discuss this briefly with Ken Kraus, because there is a water main on the west side of White Oak that will serve all 4 lots here. You just bore under there for your 1-inch tap to serve each house. But the only sanitary sewer runs through this easement here. It's hard to see the cursor, but it runs along the north side of lot 1. So whoever comes in and plats this property somebody's gonna have to extend sanitary services to the lots to the south. And I don't know, Ken, if you'd had a chance to give it any more thought to, I think that's gonna have to be a main as opposed to individual 6-inch services that come off of that main.
Right, if there's more than one property being served by the sewer, it should be a public sewer.
Right, so it can either go through the proposed utility easement along the east side of the property, or it could conceivably be out here in the right-of-way, and somebody's going to be dedicating additional 30 feet of right-of-way off of White Oak. These lots already reflect that 30-foot dedication, so the sizes of the lots, the depths of the lot already reflect the dedication of the right-of-way, I believe.
Rick, what is the right-of-way on White Oak requirements for the roadway?
Well, it's probably through some of the older areas, it's probably still 40 feet.
But like when
But
we had,
it should be a 60-foot at least, yeah.
when the preserves came in, how much did we request from them?
I think we got 50 from them.
Did we? Okay. And that's certainly a possibility to do here without compromising the lot sizes. They're showing 30 feet, but I agree with Ken, we would match whatever the preserve had on the other side.
Ken, do we have a classification on White Oak? Road classification?
It's at least a collector,
Yeah.
if
would say
not
it's
a
a
minor
collector.
arterial.
Just for the board's understanding, our thoroughfare, Mr. Casboni, I would imagine the corporation would be looking to add drives from these residentials onto White Oak?
Yes, but that's up to the individual who buys the lots. All I'm doing right now is changing from open space to R1.
Okay.
That's all I want to do for right
But the
now.
assumption is if someone's gonna buy this lot, they would need to put a driveway to
Yes,
access it.
right, but that's up to them, however they want to lay it out, but presume they have to have, exit to get in and out through White Oak, yes.
Okay,
Yes,
and how
that's
many,
correct.
and there's one access point there currently on the White Oak onto this property?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
well, then, we actually have a cul-de-sac on Hilltop, too, which is a dead end.
Yeah.
Right.
Just for the board's understanding, if you look at our thoroughfare plan, and I've learned this lesson, last year, when we have a certain thoroughfare, we ask residents that they should, not shall, should, like, reduce or minimize the number of driveways onto a roadway. The preserves gave 50 feet. We would probably ask this developer or any future development along this to give some roadway enlargement. If it's a collector or minor arterial, we would ask them to minimize, if not provide any more direct access for a developer or for private drives. I had that case with the Continental. I would have that issue here with this, unless they want to put a private roadway in to service all 4 roads. But that is, again, that is just my opinion and how I look at the thoroughfare plan. This is a major north-south. I would consider it a major north-south through the town of St. John. And limiting driveway access, I think, would be important for this White Oak. Why? I understand Mr. Casboni is only looking for rezoning. He's not asking for driveway access, but if you're creating a lot, you have to assume there's gonna be a driveway to access White Oak.
I would agree with you also, John. Just need to limit the amount of driveways that would go onto this White Oak Avenue. Do you, Mr. Casboni, do you own the property to the east of these lots?
Yeah, well, yes, in the back, but that's phase 2, that's.
That's what?
That's actually phase 2, and the only thing I wanna do is get the, lots on White Oak. From
Why wouldn't you wanna do this all at once, phase 1 and phase 2? Show us the plat of that all at the same time, then we might be able to have the chance to eliminate driveway access onto White Oak Avenue.
For right now, I'd like to get them changed from open space. My brother just passed away last January, and this was in the making that I'd like to get done. So, right now, you know, I like to carry out his dream that he wanted to get done. So, I mean, we have the surveyor that already platted them out in December.
Yeah.
So, it's
That's
already.
how I'd like for you to
Well,
approach
in
this.
possibly,
Let's
I
look
can't
at it
say
all-
in the.
Let's
you
look
know,
all at it at the same time.
Well, for
And
right
then-
now, I like to keep, you know, part of my property kind of private from myself for right now to enjoy it, the wildlife habitat for right now. And then as I grow older and age, I can, you know, sell the rest of the property for right now. But I like to, you know, just get these lots taken care of for right now.
Yeah, well,
So he can come, so what would happen, Rick, he would come back, or he wouldn't have to come back, so April we would, or I'm sorry, March 4th, this would be on the agenda for public hearing in April.
It'd be announced for, yes.
It would be announced for a
April.
public hearing in
Right,
April,
mhm.
then at that time, we would have a public hearing in April.
Right.
All right. But again, board, just for you understanding, if you look at our thoroughfare plan, again, it's should versus shall. I always tell my kids they should behave. That doesn't mean they do it. But sometimes we use those terms and again, we're increasing access points. They're large lots. I understand that, but you're increasing from 1 to 4 and multiple. And why he's not asking for driveways, it would be assumed that there would be driveway access, private driveways to that point. Sooner or later, we gotta figure out the best approach for White Oak and what we need to do with that, so that is my 2 cents.
Because there's also a connection with 96 that goes nowhere.
Let's see if we can
From
figure
Acorn.
Yeah,
well, that's what
So-
I'm saying. Have this.
No, I got it.
so, Mr. any more questions, or Mr. Casmode? Yep,
I have one question.
you,
Then he's gonna-
This is kind of directed to Rick Eberly. I've been calling the Hammond Times and the Post Tribune, and they want to know, it's supposed to be 15 days before April 1st. So they want to put it in right now.
They can.
And okay, but they want to run it right now, so it has to be 15 days before April 1st?
Right.
Or can you put it in for next week? Is it a minimum of 15 maximum days before April 1st?
It's
or
just a
what?
minimum of 15 days before the public hearing.
No,
And your
so-
public hearing would be April 1st, so you can publish it you could publish it anytime.
I can publish it next week then if I
Yes.
want to. I just want to make clarification because
Yep.
they wanted to do it last Saturday. And I said, now, wait a second, because, you know, I don't want to, you know, get caught up in a,
Yeah.
you,
you know, a firestorm here, so,
you
you
just
know.
gotta do it before 15 days. It doesn't say
Oh,
how
before
soon.
15
You
days.
just gotta do
Okay.
it before 15 days.
All right,
It
I
could be
just wanna-
315 days before, but. you
Okay,
know.
well, they actually want to run it Valentine's Day.
Don't muddy the
Yeah.
waters.
You know, and I said, wait a second here, you know, so, okay.
But
All
Mr.
right.
Casmode, do you understand some of the comments and concerns with the private driveways? Just,
Oh,
I just want to make
yes.
sure you're aware of that.
Yes, but there's actually driveways down White Oak too. I mean, there's a lot of people live down White Oak too. That's the older
I
section.
agree with that. I
Okay.
agree with that.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Casmoni, thank you for your
All
time.
right.
And,
Thank
oh,
you.
I'm sorry, any questions or comments from the board before we move on? All right, next on the agenda, Paul, am I turning that over to you, or Rick, or?
Mr. Kennedy, just a comment. I have the thoroughfare plan open now. I know Rick had the comp plan, but I actually whipped out the thoroughfare plan real quick. And I believe that's a minor arterial, and maybe Rick can verify that. White Oak.
Yeah.
We need a 90-foot right-of-way at least, so at least 45 foot on the side, but I agree, probably mirror what Preserves gave. And no direct residential drives, but it is a should, not a shall there. We do have a shall for the right-of-way, so the right-of-way shall be granted. That's found in another portion, but the residential drives is a should, and it's a touchy subject. So when it's platted out, it should be looked at closely. There could be solutions like driveway sharing. Hard to say, but there's
You know
ways
how
of
I
it.
was with the Continental.
Oh, yeah, no, I completely agree. White Oak is turning into quite the corridor, so.
And I don't want a racetrack either. That's what
Right.
I'm not proposing. I'm just trying to minimize any opportunity for, connection, so.
Right.
I got my first speeding ticket in St. John on White Oak because I was going too fast, so. I understand that.
I live on a major road, Joliet Street, and you dare not want to back up onto Joliet. It just, it's a concern. I have a wide enough driveway where I can turn around and pull out, but I wouldn't recommend anyone backing out onto a major thoroughfare like that.
And I think the Continental understood the board's concern. They try to increase the deceleration lane, so that access point, but again, it's just another area to be concerned with. All right, Paul, are we going over any comments or concerns regarding the last item?
So subdivision control ordinance, Adam and Rick and I have exchanged some correspondence about working on that. So tonight, there's a few subjects. First, Adam's drafted a very rough first edition of a revision to have us look at pipeline easements or pipeline impact areas in platting out subdivisions to keep I believe it's called an impact area. So,
Impact area, yes.
right. So, Rick, are you passing that out right now? So, the goal is to provide somewhat of a buffer between pipelines and residences or structures. But it's not just the structure we're concerned with. It's the term human activity is used, I believe, in the ordinance as well. So the concern would be you have a pipeline running through a lot. A homeowner might not have those utilities identified, might dig in the yard, might cause a problem, might be a danger to themselves, the community, and everything. So we would like to revise the subdivision control ordinance to minimize the risk of human activity over pipeline easements and minimize the encroachment of pipelines through lots and onto lots. And it's a safety issue. It's also a general welfare issue. If you have a pipeline going right through the middle of your lot, they're going to be digging it up for maintenance, that kind of thing. It's not a great thing for a homeowner. So Adam drafted an ordinance, and that it's essentially the direction, and Adam, step in if you think I'm off base. It's a two-pronged approach to accomplish this. One would be a minimum size lot in a given zoning district. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's say you have an R1 lot, it's 20,000 square foot. That's the minimum. So if it's a 20,000 square foot lot, it cannot have any encroachment of a pipeline within that lot. If you go over the minimum, there could be encroachment, but a different set of rules, that's the second prong, come into play, and that's a distance from the building setback lines. You have your rear yard, your side yards, your front yard. So you would take that invisible border that's around the structure and measure out X amount of feet. before you're, which that's the impact area as it's defined. So you have a pipeline easement, so you come to the edge of the easement. He suggests as a starting point a 50-foot impact area, so there'd have to be 50 feet between the edge of the pipeline easement and any of the building setback lines. Did I explain that properly?
I believe you did, Paul. That was my intention in drafting it, so.
So if you had a huge lot, now a pipeline easement can run through it, but you still have this barrier or this buffer around the house where the most human activity occurs, where the, greatest risk of something going wrong would be had. So that's the idea, and that would be incorporated into our subdivision control ordinance. It would be a concrete standard that developers would have to meet. So it would keep the pipelines out of the lots, which is the goal. So, and I know some of you've had firsthand experience with that in the past year or two.
So question, we have the easement that abuts a property line. We have the high-pressure easement, property line of the owner, of a property owner. And then there's a 50-foot between that property delineation and the structure, the house.
No, I think the 50-foot impact area is intended to delineate the area. In addition, there would be the setback required.
So if you have a
for that
40-foot
zoning
rear yard
classification.
setback, it'd be like 90 from the back of your house to where the pipeline easement begins.
What about a pool? Or pool?
Talking about an occupied structure.
Occupied structure.
For the pool. I don't believe there's any setback requirements for.
Well, I mean,
pools or-
like a pool has to be 10 feet off of side and rear property line, so
Oh,
it's,
that's right.
yeah, a
And that
shed
can't
only
be
has
in
to
an
be 5
easement
feet,
either,
a
so-
detached garage, 5 feet. But we're talking about trying to protect an occupied structure as opposed
So-
to a detached garage or a shed or a pool or something like that.
Right, so that impact area is more for, that's a minimum around the building setbacks. But if you have a minimum sized residential lot, which a lot of them are, they come up with R2s, they're all 15,000 square foot, you can't have anything on the lot. That's the way we're intending it to be written. So any minimum sized lot has to exclude a pipeline easement. In addition, that easement
So you
has to
don't
be.
count the easement area as part of your square footage of your lot.
Right, and in addition, or, in parallel essentially, at the same time, you have those building setbacks, which draws an invisible border around the house. You'd have to add 50
Yeah,
feet
'cause
to
the
that
house would have
before
a
you
40%
see an
and
easement.
that's not even considering they might not go all the way back. They might be
Where'd you
45.
come up with the 50 feet? Was the pipelines contacted and
No, so.
do they have
I
a
don't
certain
think so. Most of the people
distance
do
that
all
they're
go all the way to the
warm and
front.
fuzzy?
Well,
They go
so there,
Like a 30 or 40,
in my
depending on if it's
review
R2
of
or
other municipalities that have adopted similar regulation, there is used by and promulgated by the Department of Transportation a formula that takes into consideration the pipeline diameter and the pressure being used. That information I did not investigate or determine, at least for the Vector pipeline or any of the other pipelines. But typically, and again, I say this in generality because when I looked at this, I didn't actually do the calculation, but I did some rough calculations. And for, a 36 or 42-inch pipeline that might be at 1,000 PSI or more, transferring natural gas, the calculation would be much greater than 50 feet. And basically what it is, it's a calculation that's determined, it's called an impact radius area. So if there was some type of failure, what area around the pipeline would be affected adversely. And so that's how they come up with the calculation. So in making this ordinance, purposefully wanted to try to minimize at least what the impact area would be. And
Like for an R2, you have
I would
30
say
in
that
front,
50 feet
80 to
is
40, so that'd be 40 to
not
the
something
house,
that's,
and the 50 is like-
particularly set in stone. I think there's some
So that'd
adjustments
be
that can be
90 from
made
the
and could
house
be
to the
done so
pipeline.
based on perhaps the size of the pipeline or what type of pipeline we're talking about in the town of St. John. But in drafting this, I was thinking and really focused on the Vector pipeline, which I believe is probably the most significant pipeline in the town of St. John.
Yeah, I don't remember that pressure.
It's
what
high.
it was. I know it was high, 600 or 800.
It's high, and it's
yeah.
1.6, 1.8 billion cubic feet a day. We were trying to keep it simple and not have to calculate every pipeline
Right.
and every content. We're trying to set the most minimal guidelines. We're not looking to do land taking,
Right.
where we're gonna wipe out entire sections of town. But we would like to, specifically minimize the human activity over the pipelines and the pipeline activity in your backyard. So them coming in and tearing it up. So just to at least set a minimum standard, like the 50 feet is a reasonable standard that would minimize and separate those activities and add greatly to safety. Even if it's not 1,000 feet, you're adding greatly to safety, not allowing, because currently the easement could run right up to your back door, and your vector pipeline could be 15 foot from your back door step. In fact, that's the case currently in Three Springs Phase 3, and that's platted and approved. So, not a great scenario. So this 50-foot minimum, I think, is fair.
Paul and I had a chance to talk about this, but it was very late this afternoon, and he did ask me to come up with a couple of like schematics here of what we could be talking about. And after I gave it some thought, Paul, I think I guess I've arrived at the conclusion that I think we just have to keep the pipeline easements off of lots regardless of their size. And the reason I say that is, if you look up at your screens, here's a 20,000 square foot lot, 100 by 200 foot. I think most of us understand that a 20,000 square foot lot does not have to be, it has to be at least, every lot has to be at least 100 feet wide. But that doesn't mean it has to be 100 by 200. It could be 130 by 150, or whatever calculates out to 20,000 square feet. But the setbacks remain the same. So here's a typical 100 by 200 foot lot. You've got a 10-foot side yard setback. This is an R1 lot, by the way. You've got a 10-foot side yard setbacks, 40-foot rear and 40-foot front yards. So let's say you get a bigger lot and you've got 200 by 200. The setbacks are still the same. They're 10, 40, and 40. And you can set, as John knows from reviewing these all the time, you could set your house all the way up here against the front setback.
Right.
Or maybe you're gonna do it all the way against the rear setback. Or you might favor all the way over to one side or the other. We're not gonna know that at the platting stages.
Right.
So we can't just say that if a lot is an acre, well, then you can encroach on that lot because it's so big. Because we don't know where that house is gonna be. So I don't know how we're gonna, I like the 50-foot idea, but I think it's gonna have to be from property lines. To me, I think we're gonna have to have this 50-foot buffer
Right.
between the property line and the leading edge of an easement, a pipeline easement, if we're gonna guarantee a certain amount of separation between that pipeline easement and a structure. Again, just because you can put that structure anywhere within that rectangle that I'm showing here. So we can't just assume that with a lot this big, that the house is gonna be way up here, set right off of the 40-foot front yard setback. It may be way back here. So I think that's a little bit problematic. In your second whereas paragraph in the ordinance that you have in front of you, we start referring to high-pressure transmission lines. Are we using that range of 500 to 1,400 pounds as high pressure, or just what?
Yeah,
Because
so I don't think the ordinance intends to define with standards what a high-pressure line is. Although that is a range that I found in my research of natural gas transmission lines, what that range might be.
okay.
And so in defining the pipeline, basically, I don't know if I think the intent is to try to define a pipeline that has a minimum diameter or radius, and then also, I'm not seeing it right now, but I think that would need to be included, at least for purposes of defining,
High pressure.
well, defining what pipeline would be the subject of this
Right.
setback
Right.
or, impact area.
Right, so I don't know what we're gonna consider high pressure, but we need to know that before we can regulate it, I think.
Well, I think, wasn't the intent, Adam, to not really differentiate the pipelines? We were trying to keep it simple?
Well, it was my intent to do so, but I think we need to, I mean, there's certainly going to be a distinction to be drawn between, like, a service line, which is
Right.
only going to be, a few inches, as opposed to something which is more considered a transmission line.
Correct, we don't want to regulate, and it seemed like you
Right.
separated it out
Well, and
pretty
I
well.
think, like I said, this was my first draft. I think it is important to make that ordinance clear in defining what is a transmission line and what is not. And
Correct.
so what will it apply to and what will it not apply to? And I think, in my experience, I mean, again, I looked at 8 inches, maybe 12 inches. There's distinction between transmission line, distribution line, and service lines. And so basically going from larger to smaller. And I think the intent of the ordinance is to regulate transmission lines.
Correct.
So I think it'll have to be defined a little bit in further detail than it is currently.
So should we continue to use the language high pressure then, or should we just eliminate the pressure part of it altogether and just talk about transmission lines?
I think it would, I think it may not be necessary to include high pressure or to try to ascertain a minimum pressure above which the ordinance would apply and below which it would not, because I think that would be very difficult to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah,
So I think it would simplify it if we just simply perhaps use the diameter or radius of the pipeline itself.
okay. The other comment that I had was just where you list the various districts, the RC1 and the RC2 are actually PUDs. So I think we need to call them out as that if we're gonna continue to have those zoning districts. And I agreed, Paul, with your comment that if you're gonna try to keep it outside of a typical minimum lot, then it should be the size of that lot, minimum lot in that zoning district, as opposed to the 20,000 square feet that was in here initially, because R2 is 15,000 square feet. I know the idea is to keep the separation. I don't know how we're gonna do it if we're trying to do it according to setbacks, just simply, as I
Yeah.
say, because the house can be anywhere on the lot. And, if we're gonna say 50 feet plus the setback,
And I think
that's,
that's,
I think that's the intent,
I think
but I'm
that's
not sure
also
I
the
read it that way.
So I have and by the way, all of you new plan commissioners, this is sort of how you work through these. We're actually rewriting the rules for our town. So it's a little laborious, it's boring at times, it's tedious. I did this for a few years back in Cherville at one point, and we literally went through the zoning ordinance and the comprehensive plan. So I appreciate your patience as we work through. This is a really important one that's for the safety and welfare of our town. I have an idea based on your diagram, and that maybe we strike the entire section of worrying about whether it's on a lot or not and simply use the setbacks. So if the impact area is 50 foot from the setback, it's going to be off the lot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so you have a 40-foot rear yard setback. If it's 50 foot so you can touch the easement, then the easement's not going to be able to begin until you're 10 foot off the lot, for
Okay.
instance,
So
for
the
a
50
rear
foot
yard.
could include the setback. You're not saying setback plus 50. You're saying setback 50 feet total, and the setback can be within that.
Well, then make
No, I
it
think we
less
were
then.
including the setback, because otherwise you're going to have a problem on the side yard. So, yeah, I'm trying to remember, I haven't read it today.
Yeah.
But,
I agree, I think it has to be off the property
50 foot
line.
plus the setback.
Yeah,
Would give you,
otherwise, they could be 10 feet off that, and now you're
well,
40
You could
foot
have a large
closer.
lot, though, and I'm sorry, let me interject. I mean,
Right.
If you have a really large lot, you could very easily have the 50-foot impact area beyond the easement for the pipeline, and then even a setback for the building line, and still, very easily be able to still have the lot.
but the setback is from the lot line. It's not from the house. It's
Right.
from the lot line.
right.
And who's gonna regulate where the house is in relationship to the
So-
setback line?
So
that's
maybe
what
we
I
need to go
mean.
back to the
Yeah.
drawing board and and create a way to accommodate that. Something simple.
Well, as long as
So-
the distance to the impact area is greater than the lot line, you would only increase, if you didn't go to the lot line, you'd only increase the distance between the home and the impact area.
So what I'm trying not to do is become a hardship on the developers as far as, I mean, if they want to build 5-acre lots, right? There's plenty of room to run the pipeline and not be in the human activity area or near the structure. So we don't want to put a hardship where now that you can't even have it. So that we'd run into problems as a town if we did that. So we're trying to isolate the line from the structures in the main area of human activity. So if you have this gigantic lot, you might not mind that pipeline way at the back of it if you own 10 acres or 5 acres or 3 acres. So that's the trick, is to try to keep it isolated from the home or from the structure, the business, the
Right.
commercial structure, whatever it is.
Right. So in that case, of course, the intent is to modify the subdivision control ordinance with this language, put this language in the subdivision control ordinance, which you can grant waivers to. So if you've got the 5-acre lot example that Paul just talked about, and you're platting, you're dealing with a developer who's platting this, you can then identify the buildable area for that lot and allow a pipeline to be somewhere on the 5 acres. So you can grant this as a waiver for those exceptional situations, but for the typical situation, it just doesn't work because it's the building could be anywhere on that property.
So maybe, for the sake of saving time, we have some ideas. Adam, maybe we can come up with a different idea on measuring this impact area from a structure. And maybe Rick can give some more input as well. We can bring this back at our next study session and get it just right, polish it up. This is a very rough first draft, and this is a working meeting, so.
What's the ultimate goal here of preserving a house? If, someone puts a hole in a 1400 PSI 42-inch, are we trying to preserve the house or the structure, or what's the ultimate goal here?
We're trying to minimize the chance of any incident happening from human activity near the line. So we're trying to create space between where the people are and the home is in that line, as well as minimize impact if anything were to happen. So currently, right now, again, an easement can be built right to the house. So we're trying to create at least a minimum space, like he'd recommended a 50-foot impact area. So you'd have 50 feet until you even hit the easement. So it creates a little bit of space that if a guy puts a fence up and doesn't call 811, he's not going to auger into a line, for instance. It's more than likely, it's less likely it'll happen. Because right now, again, the example of Three Springs, guy goes to build a deck, he's going to be right on top of Vector.
So you're trying to limit the impact of a homeowner putting a hole
Right.
in the main.
Or the pipeline.
Not it rupturing on its own.
So, yeah, right.
And wiping the house out.
Correct. And I mean, it helps in both ways, as well as it also helps the homeowner in a general welfare sense to not have the pipeline company coming in every X amount of years to do maintenance and digging up your yard when it goes right through the middle. So to create some kind of a buffer is the ideal situation, but one that doesn't overly take land from our developers either. We're not looking to make it a hardship, but you've seen subdivisions done both ways. Sometimes there's an open space going through it where the pipeline exists, and sometimes there's barely any open space and the houses are really close to it. So we'd like to create that buffer.
Yeah, and Paul makes a good point, because our industrial districts now require minimum 10-acre lot sizes for industrial. You may well have room on a 10-acre site to allow for a pipeline going through, so. But, yeah, obviously, the intent is to try to create a safety zone of some sort. I like the idea of the setback plus 50 feet, but then you're creating a 50-foot area between an easement and a lot line, and what is that? What's that? I guess an outlot, I suppose it could be, but, yeah.
Yeah.
You're right.
You have to be able to have easements on the lots. Because, if you have a 20,000 square foot lot, you should be able to do a 30,000 square foot lot with the easement in the back. Still get your 20,000 outside of the easement, but they need to own it, because there's no other good way to do it. You can't just have.
The lot owner needs to own it?
It's the ideal way. I agree with what Doug's saying, and so that's why it goes back to what I was asking Adam, is if he can create a different way to calculate based on a structure.
Just needed a different kind of building line, this impact building line, so many feet from the edge of the easement. 50 feet, 60 feet, 70 feet from the edge of the easement, that's a no-build zone, period.
So it creates a
Don't call it
different,
building
it,
line, call it an impact,
it creates a different setback.
exactly, but that has to be measured from the easement.
And Doug, thanks for that input. Appreciate that.
It makes more sense, because we're looking at the Houston property, it's classic. right?
There'd be nothing left.
There won't be, but having a little 50-foot sliver be south of the pipeline, you can't do anything with that. So
Yeah.
they will just give them deep lots, big easement, and then have that buffer. I like the buffer, I really do.
Yeah.
But I think you need to be able to have the easements on the lots, just make them big enough to meet your zone besides the easement.
So I think, if I can paraphrase, if there's a transmission pipeline, we'll essentially increase the floating line, the setback, the minimum setback, and that
To
way
account for
it's-
that.
It's, yeah, it would still be, I guess,
Call it
considered.
an impact building line, or impact zone building line, it's a different type of line.
A no-build
Because,
line.
yeah.
Your building line could be in a rear easement, it could be overlapped a lot. If you had a 100-foot easement, your 40-foot setback's in there, it doesn't mean anything. Because you need an impact zone building line in addition to a building line. And then it solves all your issues. Something to that effect.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
And you can go from the center of the pipe, 75 feet, you go from the edge of the easement, because sometimes the easements, they're not centered.
Right, right.
So whatever you're comfortable with there.
I like the edge of easement.
Easement's easier to identify.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
should be from that.
Well, easement, I agree with the easement thing, because, what if they add a pipeline to
Yeah.
that easement?
Later.
So the center line of the pipe would fluctuate.
Yeah, I agree. And it makes it just easier, cleaner to be able to, you know, makes it good for a standard that can be readily apparent to an engineer and developer.
Well, and also if the easement is not parallel with the line, if it cuts off a corner, then it'll make it more clear to have a separate line.
More defined. So, a new type of building line.
Okay, that, I think, and I'll let Mr. Kennedy run the meeting, but I think we've covered that one pretty well. So I think we've hashed that one out pretty well. Adam has some homework to do.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for those
Yeah.
comments.
And a few,
Quick question, have you seen an impact zoning in any other community in Northwest Indiana? Okay, very good.
we're cutting edge, and there are some communities that have these, and they're actually very strict, far more strict. We're trying to at least set up a very minimal framework compared to what some communities have done. I think Austin, Texas has some incredible standards.
Texas, Champaign County, Illinois,
Mhm.
has adopted an ordinance, so it would have been good to have about, 15 months ago?
Yes.
Yep.
So there are a few more, and these are going to be easy. A few more things we're looking at doing. One would be our subdivision control ordinance currently gives the plan commission the option to require a wider sidewalk on a major artery. Currently, it's the option. It's not a concrete standard. We need to get to the concrete standard. We're looking to bring St. John into the new millennium here and start incorporating more bike paths, more pedestrian connectivity. So it makes sense when we're building on a major artery like either US 41 or 93rd, Joliet, Patterson, those kind of things, that instead of a regular 5-foot sidewalk, we require an 8-foot sidewalk. And John, I prefer concrete still, and I'll tell you, I've done a little bit of research since our last meeting and seen some deteriorating asphalts that I don't want the town to have to maintain. So like an 8-foot path, like what we have along Gates, from Gates all the way to the roundabout, it's reasonable. I've talked to a few contractors that the labor's the same, it's just 3 additional feet of concrete. So I wanted to bring that to the plan commission and see if there was support to update our ordinance to require that on the major arteries.
nice to have a multi-use path, whether it's sidewalk, path, however you wanna call it. Understanding the maintenance, I mean, it's a cost that the developer, concrete's more than asphalt. So, I mean, where, it will maintain longer, I'm just, bicyclist, I'm not a big bicyclist, you can tell by my shape. But I was always just told that, asphalt was preferred just for motor vehicle, not motor vehicles, but for bike.
Rollerblading, whatnot.
Rollerblading, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But
I drove along.
off the street.
Yeah, I drove along Calumet Avenue through Munster and looked at their asphalt trail. I'm like, oh boy, that's gonna cost a lot of money to fix. Yeah, so it's,
It's easier on the knees when you're running too, so.
so the asphalt, I'm sorry, the concrete that's along Joliet from Gates to the roundabout looks to be pretty smooth. I don't think they have the larger cracks. I think they're smaller, it's better. It's pretty smooth. I'm not sure if anybody's experienced that, but, and this would only impact the outer edge of a development. For instance, like the Gates thing you just saw, it would impact along Klein Avenue. It would impact on 109th or 101st, those kind of things. Or the, what do they call it, Oak Ridge. Same thing. White Oak and 109th would be at least minor arterial roads and should have a wider path for future connectivity to other subdivisions, especially like with Heartland Park there, you'd want an 8-foot path. Now, unfortunately, we can't require it because it's not a concrete standard. They only have to put in 5 feet. So we'd like to make it so it's 8 foot, so that's just the way it has to be. And it's not a huge hardship on a developer. We're only talking about the outer sidewalk of a development, not every sidewalk through it.
Right, and I think, Paul, what we would probably do is select the road classification in our thoroughfare plan that this would apply to. Is it a collector and up? Is it a minor arterial and up? Whatever that is, that again gives us a concrete standard. But if we're gonna say it, we want these 8-foot walks along collectors and greater, then we know what a collector and greater is because they're identified in the thoroughfare plan. So I think we just need to select what type of roadway we want that applicable to.
Rick, could we ask you to make a spreadsheet with that?
Yep.
For next study session? Thank
Yep.
you. Moving on to the next item, and this is one that is, again, relevant to tonight. So you looked at East Gates subdivision. Rick, could you bring up, I believe it, the replat of the area near Well 1? Because picture's
Yeah.
worth 1,000 words.
And by the way, this is not the most recent one, as Paul knows, because the most recent one has the most recent one is in your packets. It shows the lot lines going through this detention area here. So refer to
So
that one.
You don't have that one for a slide?
No, I thought I
Darn.
did, but let me look for it while you're looking at that, but
Okay, so essentially, we've been duped. An agreement was made with the developer to give a minimum square foot lot size of 11,200 square foot. There's a large average, it's an average.
Minimum would have been.
Not minimum, it is a minimum average, or, actually, it is just an average. So, there's a large detention area in the middle of that subdivision, and to help achieve the average, they have all the lots extending through the detention area. It shouldn't happen. That should not be. So that person technically owns that detention area. I'm not sure if it's gonna be easement or how they're gonna do it, but they're essentially duping the town. The town thought we were getting one thing, but we're absolutely getting something different. So by doing that, they're able to make other lots smaller and increase profitability because they've dipped into the detention area. So it takes control of lot size completely away from the town. So you think you could control lot size through your zoning ordinance, but suddenly they found a loophole to get around it.
and here's the one Paul's talking about. This is the one that reflects the.
So that was replatted, and I wish, this is the replat. It's kind of hard to see. I'm gonna hold it up. But you could see these lots extend all the way across this detention area.
Right.
This was a separate detention area, an outlot, that the HOA would have maintained. Now it's suddenly part of these people's yards.
Yeah, here's the original attempt at replatting these lots, and the detention area is outside of these lots. And now we're looking at, Now we're looking at the one Paul's talking about where the lots are platted through the detention pond.
See how they did that? So we need to change our subdivision control ordinance, or I would recommend changing it to exclude detention areas. And I'm not sure if there's any unforeseen issue or side effect from that.
I guess in one instance, Paul, and what comes to mind, John, is Willow Ridge. Willow Ridge actually is platted into a retention pond. It's a wet pond, and it's done that way because those owners want to own the lake, and only they that are around that lake can use it. Is that right, John?
Correct, yeah.
So there could be an instance where you'd want to do that. I think what you'd want to do is make sure that you achieve your minimum lot size, let's say it's 20,000 square feet, outside of that detention pond or retention pond.
Correct.
So if you want to plat it into the pond, especially a wet pond, you at least achieve a buildable area that meets or exceeds your minimum lot size for that given zoning district. But but that doesn't get rid of their ability to take credit for this kind of thing, Paul. And I'm not sure how you do that entirely. I mean, we're
PUD
not
is
gonna-
unique, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how you do that when somebody wants to plat that so that they maintain ownership of that pond. And John, I don't know if we have any others in town. That's the only one that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's the only other one I can think of,
Yeah.
other than, you know, when you have big lots where, I think, well, in Castle Rock, the big lots back up to, conservation areas and stuff like that, so it counts for the square footage, but it's not really usable.
What about Bramblewood?
That's the same thing there too, yeah.
So what if we exclude it? I mean, it could always be granted as a waiver. I mean, it's so rare at this point. You're giving me a couple examples.
Yeah, but how do you, if you grant it as a waiver, how do you keep the developer from being able to be able to get credit for the lot
Can we
size?
just put language in there that says, like, the square footage of, to meet the minimum, you can't include any of the
Detention, detention areas.
or that, but you can still own it above and beyond. So if you had a 40,000 square foot lot, you could have a 20,000 square foot R1 lot with 20,000, detention.
Sure.
But you can only get credit for the 20,000, not the whole 40.
Correct. That's the goal. The goal is to set the minimum size not in the detention area, and however we achieve the goal is okay with me. And the whole average, so then the whole averaging thing only comes in PUDs. It's a rare thing, a zoning
Yeah.
commitment.
Yeah.
Otherwise, but we do have to be cognizant that regular zoning districts, straight R1, straight R2, this same trick could be pulled. You can have a 20,000 square foot lot that's half underwater right now,
Yeah.
and that's
And
not
I
a
think
good-
we should avoid that. That I agree. If it's gonna be underwater, that should not count as, certainly it's
Or
not
any
buildable
detention
area.
for that matter. I mean, it should be, the minimum lot size should be excluded from the detention area. There should be that minimum.
Yeah, I understand that.
As John just pointed
Yeah,
out, so.
detention, wetlands, whatever you want.
Any of that.
Any of that,
Yep.
and spell it out.
You should have 20,000 foot, like if it's R1, 20,000 foot of dry buildable land.
Inhabitable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's possible to skirt our zoning ordinance and lot size through that. And it was just done tonight. And we can't do anything about it because our standards aren't there. And the zoning commitment was set, and it is what it is, so unfortunately.
Yeah, but the example of Castle Rock is a good one, because there are folks there that are going to buy those lots that have all that conservation easement on them just because it has the conservation easement on it, and their buildable lot area is not necessarily 15,000 square feet. I don't know how many,
I think it's close on Castle Rock. I think I set that conservation line maybe
pretty far back.
120, 100 feet.
Yeah, because if you look at the Moonraker plat, about half of that is conservation area.
Does it look like, John, it would meet the 15,000 square feet?
Oh, yeah, those would meet those
Yeah.
with how big they are.
Yeah.
Without that.
But I could see that being, I could see there being an
Back half
attractive lot that,
Just
yeah,
Actually, the conservation easement is 175 feet back, so we exceeded.
you exceed it, yeah, yeah.
So I had a little
So you got 175
Yeah.
feet, and then you got-
I think in most cases, we'd make it, you know,
Yeah,
we'd
I
get that
think so
minimum
too,
size.
Paul.
So
Yeah.
I think that's a good starting point.
Another suggestion, maybe the gross lot area, how do I word it, can't have more than, say, 10% of it encumbered by a detention easement. Because sometimes we put a 10-foot or 15-foot drainage easement along the back of a lot for a sewer or whatever. You don't wanna start.
I don't want, yeah, no, I don't wanna.
So, something like the gross lot area can't be more than 10% encumbered by an easement. Adam's smart. He can word it
So,
better than I can.
and Adam, I'm wondering if other nearby towns or municipalities have anything that we could possibly work from too. There might be something that exists.
Well, Paul Dyer does in terms of the wet area. We addressed it in Dyer by saying, if you have to have a 15,000 square foot lot, you can't have any portion of that in a wet pond, and take credit for the lot size. It's gotta be outside of that. So if you wanna plat a lake into it, you've gotta have in Dyer's R1 is 15,000 square feet, that's why I use that. 15,000 square feet has to be outside of the retention area. But there is no language that prevents it from being in a detention or dry bottom basin, a basin that's dry most of the time. So
Yeah. I think we need to step it up from that, yeah, just to avoid the situation what we have in East Gates tonight.
Mhm.
'Cause that could be done in a PUD, it could be done in a straight zoning district, either way.
yeah,
And just for the record, in other municipalities, specifically unincorporated in the county, they make us do that. They will not accept an outlaw. So they make the homeowners own those potentially be
right. And we essentially do too. We don't want ponds anymore, so we make the HOAs be responsible for them and own them. But they're typically shown as an outlot, as opposed to the way county does. Yeah,
And again, I don't even have a problem with, in some situations, you have a lot that has wetland or on it, but we're trying to maintain that minimum size. We're just trying to take away the loophole of being able to cram in more lots, because we're gonna call that lot size,
Yeah.
and it's not, you know?
yeah.
I'll leave that one in Adam's hands, I'm sure he'll,
I will, I haven't investigated other municipalities, so that's something I'll do. And, yeah, I'll come back to the plan commission, hopefully with a draft and, you know, some ideas for defining, everything we've discussed tonight.
thank you. Rick, I'm not sure if there was anything else that you had, in this, specifically in the subdivision control ordinance?
Well, there's a number of things, Paul, and I'm not gonna go into them tonight. I wanna be better prepared at next month's study session. But one thing that happened to come up today in a discussion with a couple of ladies in the clerk's office is the way we bill our developers for development fees. Our ordinance requires 2%, as Ken knows, and Ken calculates that, 2% of the cost of improvements for any given development. That's the roads, that's the detention ponds, grading, whatever else is included in that, Ken. But we.
$900 minimum.
$900 minimum, 2%, for anything above that. We don't collect that until secondary plat stage. And we get billings for these developments far before secondary plat stage. Some of them may never go to secondary plat. Now, the way we handled it when I was in Dyer was we charged 1% at the time of primary plat and the second 1% at the time of secondary plat, so that we at least got more money from the developer early on when we're getting billed for review of that development. It's not been a financial burden for us so far, but.
It could be.
It could be, yes,
Yeah.
it could be. We've got a couple of the gates is an example. We've got an invoice for review of the gates, and we're not anywhere near billing these folks for them. They're not anywhere near secondary plat stage. So I believe that we need to change the language in the ordinance so that we do a billing sooner than we're doing now. And I don't have any problem with splitting it 1% at primary and 1% at secondary? Or, I don't know, Ken, if 1% at the time of application for a primary plat, is that burdensome, Doug? Would you have a cost of improvement? Yeah, you wouldn't have it that early. So is primary plat reasonable at the time you're submitting for a primary plat approval? Is that still too early? There's gotta be a point at which you can charge that and cover some of your costs. Otherwise, you may never collect them if you never get to secondary plat approval. And the secondary point to that is, we wanna make sure we're charging enough to cover our costs.
Yeah.
Until the change in administration, I've not had Ken, sorry, but you do the review for us, so, I don't get the Haas engineering invoices. What I'm used to doing, when I was in Dyer, was I'd get the invoices and I'd list them and I would subtract them from the amount of money I'd collected from the developer and make sure that we were never running short. The language in our ordinance allowed us to build above and beyond. We used 2% as well, but again, we did it 1% and 1%. The language in our ordinance allowed us to bill above and beyond what we collected if we're in a situation where our review costs us more than we've collected. So I'd like to make those changes, come up with, talk to Ken, talk to folks like Doug and see where does it make sense to make that first billing so that we're covering our costs early on.
Maybe there's a minimum bill right up front,
Yeah.
that the developer cuts a check to the town.
With the
Right in the
application.
beginning, maybe based on acreage or, $100 an acre, 40 acres,
Yeah.
It might be interesting,
Just to get it started, and then your 1% and 1%,
Right.
will kick in after that.
Right.
what are other towns doing too? I'd be curious. See, I mean, you mentioned Dyer, and Dyer sounds like they're already in a better position. Perhaps Cedar Lake, Cherville, what other, municipalities, Crown Point, how are they approaching it? They may have written up something that we could just copy.
Yeah. So that's an example of a change, but there are a number of other changes that between Ken and I and Adam as well, when we get a chance to get together on this, that we'll be making recommendations on. But I think next month's study session, I'll have, prior to that, I'll have a packet for you of our recommendations. And I would hope to have a public hearing on this in April.
For subdivision
For
control?
subdivision control
Or
ordinance.
May at the latest.
May at
It
the
might
latest,
take
yeah.
to May if we still
Yeah.
have to massage the
Right.
pipeline one or.
Right.
All the other ones seem pretty straightforward, but the pipeline one and the detention area one might be a bit tricky. Maybe not. So April or May, one or the
Yeah,
other.
April or May, and then it would be a recommendation to the council to adopt whatever changes, and Adam will put it into the ordinance format for the council to consider. So I think May's probably more realistic, Paul, to shoot for, yeah.
Could be approved by Memorial Day.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Awesome. From board members, any comments to Councilman?
For the subdivision control ordinance, are we gonna look at like the development standards and stuff as far as like
Yes.
rebar and curbs and stuff like that, and updating or changing that?
Yeah.
Absolutely, John. Bring your input either here or offline to staff.
Right.
Or Ken.
Lighting is another example. We don't require LED lighting, for example.
Yeah, 'cause I
Our-
know that was always
our standard is
sticking point.
still-
We have 900 different light bulbs in every subdivision.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's gotta be a
Yeah,
standard.
we still use the 100 watt high pressure sodium, don't we?
50, 70, 90, 100, 150, in a mix of high pressure sodium or metal halide.
Now, that would not apply to developers' decorative street lighting if you decide to allow that, but our standard would be set, and right now, I think we use 100, does that sound right, Ken, 100 watt high pressure sodium? I think that's our streetlight standard.
Yeah, that's the streetlight. Of course, that was written before LEDs were even invented.
Yeah, it's
Right.
time to
So-
update that for sure,
So
so.
to say we're gonna use LEDs, you know, and then something else comes along,
Yeah.
that might be problematic.
Yeah, we had
Well-
some sort of language in there to allow for the most up-to-date technological
Yeah.
advancement in lighting, whatever that might be, yeah.
And by all means, again, John, if you have any input, bring it out.
Yeah, I'll get with Ricky.
Present it to Rick. Rick will work with Ken on the more technical stuff like that. I know we had debated about the top coat of asphalt, whether that was in there or not, so that was another detail that Ken recommended,
Right,
so.
right. Okay. We have our marching orders.
Thank you.
With that, no more questions, comments, we adjourn.